it just made me think of this idea that, creating this whole sanctuary, this ark that's going to eventually store the tablets, it's created in community, just like we study Torah in community, or we study the text in community, and it's community coming together to build the sanctuary that's going to house that covenant and create that meeting place with God. So I think it's like a cool little moment to remember the importance of community.
Hello, and welcome to Ancient Jesus Future Faith, the podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tana Sheaver, and I am joined by Sarah Minardi.
Hello.
And Don Sheaver.
Hey.
And today we're going to be talking about Exodus 25. I almost said Genesis 25 by accident. Exodus 25. And I'm going to start us off by reading the passage that we're going to be discussing today. So 25, starting with verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red and another type of durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and breastpiece. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet, with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They are not to be removed. Then put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law, which I will give you. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking towards the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law that I will give you. There, above the cover, between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet you and give you all my commands for the Israelites." There we go.
Great job. So does anything stick out to either of you in that passage?
Other than tabernacle?
Tabernacle.
I want a mug that says mobile tabernacle.
Tabernacle. Shut up. Anyway, it's very detailed.
Yes.
Honestly, the thing that was going through my mind was Indiana Jones. I was like reading the descriptions and I was in my mind trying to picture the ark in the movie and being like, did it actually look like it's described here?
And it didn't mention any melting faces.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those sections that if we read through it, we kind of go on autopilot, and it's like a grocery list.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, eh. And
Yeah,
it's right up there with like some of the genealogies and stuff that you get to. I think this one's a little bit easier to read because there aren't quite as many extremely unknowns in it, right? Like maybe the ephod is something unique, but a lot of the stuff we can at least imagine what those things would be. And the other thing is, from this passage, I often think about the imagery in the tomb after Jesus's resurrection, there's an angel sitting at each end of
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
of where Jesus was resting, and very much, I believe, pointing at this tabernacle moment, because that is the place, that's the mercy seat that's
Yeah.
between the two angels where God speaks from.
Especially since he says, "Put my covenant in the ark," and so if Jesus is kind of like the
Torah.
ark, and he is the fulfillment of Torah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all really interesting imagery.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, cool.
Anything for you, Tana, besides the details?
Yeah, it's just that it is interesting. Like when something like this comes up, I sort of do gloss over, and that's a shame because, excuse me, there's probably a lot of really cool detail that we miss out on. Like it's kind of like the genealogies. You're like, okay, this person begat that person, and like whatever, and you're just like whatever. But then you start to go read through, and you're like, oh, but that means they're connecting, Jesus to this person or whatever. So it was just sort of like, oh, gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple, scarlet,
And there's just a lot of details, and I think, for myself, being a very righteous person, I know that the devil is in the details. And so I avoid those.
The ark of the devil.
Man, I'm just laughing because, I remember...
Because I'm funny. That's why you're laughing.
But just remembering to, teaching at our church, I remember teaching on genealogies and teaching on this passage.
That's
I'm
true.
like, it's funny. This is my thing, I guess.
I love it.
And you just said the devil's in the details. So what does that mean about Sarah?
This is kind of like the beginning of a lot of instructions given to Moses about how to build the tabernacle. And when I was looking at this, I started to notice that some of the instructions begin, at least in my translation, with they. Starting right at 25 verse 8, they are to make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them. So, Tana, can you look at your translation? You stopped at 22, which is exactly where we were going to stop. But how does verse 23 start for you? Or can you just read verse 23?
Make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, a cubit wide, and a cubit and a half high.
Okay. So my translation says you are to construct a table of acacia wood. And that... the following instructions all start in my translation with you. You are to construct, you are to construct.
Oh, interesting.
Instead of they. So if you kind of do a quick skimming, because it is a lot to read, you start in my translation to see you all over the place. There's lots of paragraphs that are divided by that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing about they are to make a sanctuary, switching with the you. So do you have any thoughts around that?
That's very interesting, because I would say the you is implied in my, because it doesn't say you in my translation here. It just says make, overlay, make. So it's the you is kind of implied.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. They versus you. Where's the they? I want to see if my translation says they.
25 verse 8.
Oh yeah, it does.
Can you read it?
Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Well, it starts with the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites," and then over time it switches to a you. So is that implying that he's like, "Okay, Moses, you're a part of this"? Not just dictate it to the Israelites to do. You do it too. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Don?
I think thinking through this and having heard you speak on this before, so I'm trying to be conscientious of, I don't want to go too far, because I'm trying to think what was my natural thought about it versus some of the things that I've had the opportunity to learn from you, Sarah. But it's interesting because I think there's a collective at the beginning of that all of you in some way will participate in this. But then when we get to this moment, some of the specific things are actually going to be asked of not necessarily the whole collective.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where because, God says, build me, he says to Israel, build me a tabernacle. Everyone's involved in that. Everyone participates in that. But in these specific things that we get after verse 22, it's probably not every single person in Israel is going to contribute to building this thing of acacia wood.
Yeah. And even if we keep skimming forward, you'll see that in chapter 31, it talks about, my pericope says God's provision of the skilled workers. Mm. So that there's like skilled
Mine's
people.
way more boring. It just says the lampstand.
Oh, wait, where?
For above 31.
Oh, no, chapter 31.
Oh, chapter 31. I was looking at verse 31. Okay.
No, it keeps on going. It
Sorry.
goes. But yes, the lampstand being an example, but like the showbread table, the menorah, the altar, not like being constructed by these skilled people, which, most likely, or maybe in some cases was one person, but maybe like a small group of people. But it just made me think of this idea that, creating this whole sanctuary, this ark that's going to eventually store the tablets, it's created in community, just like we study Torah in community, or we study the text in community. And it's community coming together to build the sanctuary that's going to house that covenant and create that meeting place with God. So I think it's like a cool little moment to remember the importance of community.
Is so in the this would be Hebrew, right? Yeah. Would there be, I don't know enough about Hebrew to know if there'd be like a big distinction between the different like pronouns and, I'm just wondering if this has anything to do with English translations and if it would say you versus they at different spots.
The Hebrew does have the ability to differentiate between collective or individual.
Okay.
I don't know about this particular passage. If it is, my guess is that there is some switch in the language.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had in my notes that they are all meant to be the singular you, but I prepared this a long time ago, and I don't remember if I did due diligence to like that was just.
Sarah, if
I
there
feel
is
like I should have, right?
If there is anything I know about you, it's that you did due diligence.
Like I want to say that I did, but I can't say 100%. So.
Well, that. See, that would be interesting then, because verse 10 says, "Have them make an ark of acacia wood," but then the next one is like overlay it, which implies you, and yours says you, I think.
Yeah.
Which implies that like the Israelites are making the wood part, but then the gold stuff is up to Moses, if it is a singular
or a
you.
skilled person of some sort.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. So we've got these tablets. We got this ark being made. These tablets going into the ark. The ark is the sanctuary, and this is actually something that happened in. This is like a common thing in the time to preserve covenants on stone and place them in a sanctuary for different deities. So this isn't something, to us, it might seem like a very unique type of thing, but this was actually like a common thing in other historical documents. But we see a lot of instructions on how to build the vessel because we have to keep the tablet safe. And it's acting as a sanctuary for the very presence of God. So there's tons and tons of instructions we're not going to read here today. But the ultimate goal is that that the ark is creating a place of safety for the tablets, and that the very instructions that are held within, or the parallel I think that's really cool is that the Torah, the covenant that's actually being held within is also a means of safety for people. So we have a physical structure that's creating a safe way to maintain this covenant. But when we think of the covenant and we think in the broader picture of Torah, that living out Torah also creates safety for people.
It's like safety inception.
Yeah. So do we see other places in the text whose ultimate purpose are safety or sanctuary? Other vessels that might pop in your mind?
Good.
The basket that carried Moses.
Yeah.
And then the other reference to that same word. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah.
Noah's Ark is the same word as basket.
Yes.
You know what? For some reason, that was like a foregone conclusion in my mind already. And so I was trying to think of something other than Noah's Ark.
But yeah, the word
really
ark
big
used
basket.
in Noah and used for Moses' basket, same word. But yeah, I mean, Noah's Ark holds people, saves lives
And animals.
and animals.
You know, it's interesting you saying that or asking that question because of the connection I made earlier with the tomb. I actually then think about the tomb, or that for 3 days,
Interesting.
right? Jesus' body was kept safe in that space.
Yeah.
That's it. That's actually an interesting way to look at a tomb in general.
Yeah.
Is it's to kind of like, keep the body safe.
Yeah. And then you have, you could make a case for the giant creature with Jonah. So yeah, I can probably keep going. Even fascinating ones like the lion's den, which was meant for harm, but instead became a sanctuary of safety for Daniel. Or even the furnace.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that, and then I was like, is that really safe?
So-
Maybe they were kept safe from the fire, but I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I thought about the manger being like
Oh yeah.
place for baby Jesus.
That's kind of a cool picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of vessels of safety in the text. I think, even wells are often used, even though we don't find people in the well. Timmy isn't in the well. No lassie is needed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to take a little side trail that's going to eventually bring us back to this idea of vessels and sanctuary and safety and all that.
Call it a side quest.
Side quest.
It's a side quest.
And I'm on the right page. I'm laughing because I numbered my pages this morning. My notes are terrible. And so they weren't in the wrong order. And then I numbered them wrong.
You never.
Wait a minute. We're not there yet. So anyway, I homeschool my daughter. So part of homeschooling, we do Latin. And we were learning vocabulary. And one of the things that we learn with the vocabulary is once we learn the Latin word, we look at the words in other languages and in English that seem to have come from that word, the derivatives of that word. And I got really struck by this idea last year when we learned about the word save. And do you know what save means in Latin? Save Regina. Sister Act, but...
Yeah.
That's my level pop culture right there, Sarah.
Is it like safety?
It's like a greeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So save is what you learn as beginning level as like hello, but maybe like the more actual meaning is be well. But it's like how we would translate hello. So if we were saying hello in Latin, we would say save.
Okay.
And then what about, so save is spelled S-A-L-V-E, if you can.
Salve.
Yeah, salve, exactly. So there's a perfect example. What are other derivatives from?
Salutation.
Yeah, salutations, salve. So salve like a healing balm. Salutations like greetings.
And salvation.
Salvation. Yeah. So when I was thinking, when I saw that the actual meaning of like the greeting word, what we would say hello, that the actual meaning was be well, I thought that was like, it really just put me off because I'm like, I feel like be well, it'd be weird to like come into your home and be like, be well.
Right. It feels like more
Take
like
care.
a goodbye.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought. It felt
Yeah.
more like a goodbye.
Or
And,
like take care.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
hey, take care. We'll see ya.
Yeah, or fairly well.
Right.
So then we got Polly Wally Doodle.
Man.
But it seems like a hopeful send off to take care, be
Yeah.
okay till we meet again. But it's really hard to imagine opening the door, welcoming somebody in my house and saying, be well as they come in.
Right.
Yeah.
Or thinking of the derivatives to open the door and say, salvation.
I think offering some healing balm as they walk in your house is
Right.
kind of threatening.
I was actually thinking about
Let me
that with the
anoint
be
you.
well. Right. I was actually thinking that with the be well. It was almost like a good luck. Welcome to my home. Good luck.
Yeah. Or these I don't know if post-COVID is the right term, but it's like hand sanitizer, you know? It's
Yeah.
That's like the anointing balm that you see everywhere. Welcome. Hand sanitizer. So salvation is a broader term in Greek than we usually think of, includes the concepts of restoration to a state of safety, soundness, health, and well-being, as well as preservation from danger or destruction. So the more I thought about the broader term of salvation, it really struck me, and I've really actually come to love the idea that, like, when I welcome somebody or greet somebody, I can be welcoming them into a place of safety and salvation and maybe even healing. So, like, literally my home can be a protection from the elements. If somebody comes to my house and it's storming like the other night, it's like protection, like, come in, be well, be safe. It can be a place to find food and water, a place to find love, companionship, care, relationship, and maybe even in turn healing. So the idea that as I'm welcoming somebody, it's not go out into the world and be well, it's like come in here and be well.
You know, first of all, I love that because I feel like it puts, it kind of amplifies the concept of hospitality, I think. Secondly, we have a friend who lives on Grace Road, and so she calls her house Grace Place. And she's incredibly hospitable, like one of the most hospitable people I know, and always tries to make her home incredibly welcoming to people. And she even wrote us a blessing when we moved into this house, like a blessing for our home. And so that's kind of...
And I feel like her spare room that I stay in when I visit, it was designed for me. I know it wasn't.
Oh my gosh, it was.
It totally feels like it was designed
But I mean,
for me.
even that is an example, a great example of how she went to extraordinary lengths to make a guest room in her home be just for guests. I mean, to be like optimized for guests, you know? And so that's who I was thinking of when you were talking about this, because I feel like she's such a great example of like how you can be someone's salvation in a way, you know, of this sort of be well. Like I feel that when I go into her home, like this, almost like the greeting would be well, in my home, you know? So, it kind of flips it a little bit. Yeah.
Any thoughts, Don?
I'm just thinking about that guest room.
He's already back there.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And I think, to me, I kind of go, man, I hope that I can make that switch in my mindset, right? When someone comes in, when you came into my home this morning, that wasn't what I was thinking about. I was thinking about, or the microphone set up and everything else, right? But there's something really...
You offered coffee, so that was be well.
That's true. That was only because I was making myself coffee and I didn't want to look like a bad host. I really didn't care about your well-being in that case, Sarah. No, but there's something really beautiful about the activeness, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things we've talked about on the podcast and on our live streams and just in conversations in general is about the physicality and the intentionality of the Hebrew Bible and even the New Testament, but later gets interpreted to just primarily allegory and therefore not a physicality of salvation. And so I think what you're presenting, at least as of right now, is something that's so tangible for us people of faith to think about our space that we invite someone into is kind of a small portion of expressing salvation. Yeah. So I absolutely love the idea.
Yeah.
Instead of like, what are the signs? Something is found here. Like there's like, people have writings on the wall, like, you know, like peace is found here or something like that. Like now I want one that says salvation is found here.
Yeah. Wow. That'd be cool. So what's one of our favorite hospitality stories, or Don's favorite hospitality story, I should say?
Do you want me to guess, or are you going to say
He's smiling, so I know he knows.
I know. I mean,
you know what it is,
yes.
Obviously. I'm going to guess it's Abraham with 3 strangers.
That's right.
I mean, it's also my favorite.
Yeah.
It's probably because it's Don's favorite. Just like I don't actually care about sports, but I will root for the Cavs.
So, I'm sorry. I just blipped out and wasn't even paying attention to what you were saying.
It was
now I'm just going to move on.
It was inconsequential, so go ahead.
I was already like a step ahead. Just waiting for Tana to start talking so I can say what I had to say. No, it's terrible. Anyway, I'm going to read it again at the risk of us having talked about it in previous podcasts or live streams or things like that. But that's going to happen, if we do this podcast for any length of time. So,
yeah.
But let's indulge on Genesis 18.
Okay.
So then the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed to the ground. Then he said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a bit of bread so that you may strengthen yourselves. This is why you have passed your servant's way. Later you can continue on." "Yes," they replied, "do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, make a ton of bread." That's not what it says, but that's what it means. Meanwhile, Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender choice calf. He gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Then Abraham took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the trees. So I just wanted to read it and remember that Abraham ran to be able to do this.
And he was a fan of carb loading.
Yes, and he sustained them. Go ahead.
Wasn't he also wasn't this right after he was circumcised?
Yes, he had just had some flesh removed from...
And then he's running out.
Yeah, and we just ask people not to visualize that. Okay.
But the doorway to our home, or the entrance to Abraham's tent, all these things, and even just we're talking about, having our homes, having a guest room, being these places of safety, those are all really great. But I even want to go a step further, because let's think about the life of Jesus now. So let's pivot again. So in the life of Jesus, what are some examples of how he offered safety or sanctuary or salvation that we see in the text?
Well, I feel like the really obvious answer is the Sunday school answer of Jesus died on the cross for our salvation.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking more practical things before that.
Right.
But yeah, no.
I felt like I had to at least say the Sunday school answer that was out there. Any of the times he heals people.
Yes, healing is a huge one.
I think even there's some obvious phrases, anyone who's weary and tired, come and find rest in me. Mm-hmm. I think that, you also have, it's almost like a color commentator viewing Jesus's life, talking about the fact that he always wanted children. It seemed like he always wanted children to have access to him, and that he didn't turn away a woman that was, bleeding. So again, the healing pieces, but some of the cultural norms that we would expect, at least there to be some hesitation from someone to encounter the person. Jesus seems to not hesitate, at least in the memory of the author that's writing these stories.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it's leprosy and the 10 individuals with leprosy that he heals, right? That there's these moments that Jesus just doesn't hesitate to create acceptance and space for people that maybe are marginalized. So that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah. That's great.
What a connection that's occurring to me is there's the point when I believe the person is blind, and it's I think Jesus spits in the
dirt, or
the dirt, and and then puts it on the eyes, and the guy can see, and he's basically making a salve.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just an interesting connection to me.
And something that reminds me of is the healing of the gentleman next to the pool of water, that when the water would ripple, it was a sign that an angel had touched it, and then the first one in the water would be healed. And Jesus is talking to the person that comes every day to that pool. Mm-hmm. And he asks the gentleman if he wants to be healed. And I also just think that's, I suffer from a lot of migraines, and the number of people, well-meaning people in the church, and this is even a minor thing. So people have visible disability, I think probably end up experiencing this way more often. But people would just pray away my migraines. It has yet to work. Pray away my migraines without even asking me if I want.
Well, Don, that's just because your faith isn't strong enough.
Well, yeah, and we can get into that another time. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I do love that in this idea of safety and cultivating a space that is safe, Jesus doesn't even assume what the person wants.
Yeah.
That Jesus, and I think sometimes with hospitality, that's a fine line, right?
Yeah.
Of assuming what people want, and as opposed to asking what they want.
You know, a parallel I can think of to that today is there are a lot of people in the deaf community who do not want hearing aids or the are they called cochlear implants, I think. And that's, you know, that's an argument. Like some people will be like, oh, but I can heal you, I can make your life better, I can do this. And some of them are like, no, I don't want that.
Because some of that is we want to avoid the inconvenience.
Right.
As people with able to hear and communicate, we don't want to have to change the way we communicate so we're more equitable.
Right.
And so getting people hearing aids or implants is also selfish in some ways.
But I can think of like the way that it feels like there's like a direct imitation there of Jesus that we can do then is not be like, well, we're going to, you know, force it on you or whatever, or expect that that's what you would want as well. We're going to ask if that's what you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
So we really side railed or side
No,
quested.
that's okay. I mean, we're talking about Jesus and like, what are the things how did he bring safety to people? Let's see, what did we not mention? We mentioned the healing. We mentioned kind of dignity and respect for people's preferences and opinions.
I mean, it feels like, I know this is overly simplified, but Jesus was salvation itself. And I don't mean that in the like dying on the cross kind of way, but I just mean like everything about Jesus was going through and creating safety and healing for people.
Yeah.
So like Lazarus.
A wake everywhere he went, he left a wake of safety.
Yes. Yeah. So like Lazarus, you know, raising Lazarus, that could be seen as an act of salvation.
Or meeting the practical needs too, like feeding the crowds,
Absolutely.
feeding people.
Yeah, I was thinking about the loaves and fishes.
Yeah.
Or even calming the sea when the apostles are being tossed about and terrified. And
you know, there's one of the beautiful pieces of imagery, I think, with Jesus is the whole like creating healing without even realize, like just by very, very being. And I'm thinking about the woman who reached out and touched his garment. Like, I just think, wouldn't that be amazing to be that much of a presence of healing for people that you're doing it without you even realizing it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
maybe you are.
Well,
I'm not.
that'd be nice.
I don't mean that to be facetious.
Yeah,
I think if you don't know, you don't know, and I think that there are lots of people of faith and those who do not hold a faith that their presence in many situations is indeed doing those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking back to the friend I mentioned earlier, like she is very much that for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think she realizes it. I've mentioned enough clues that if she's listening to this episode, she knows I'm talking about her. So maybe it'll sink in.
Yeah, but like that's exactly where I was going, Tana, in two ways. One, to kind of talk about how he's carrying that healing everywhere he goes. Like you said, the wake behind him. And, you know, I was also thinking about the story of the woman who grabbed his garment and was healed. Like he's a bodily vessel of healing. He's bringing that safety, salvation everywhere. And, and just like you said, like, yeah, it was like his whole life. And that makes me think of like, you know, when back to the instructions of the Ark of the Covenant, was that there's very detailed instructions about how to make it so that it can go with them.
Yeah,
the
right.
handles
right,
and the poles and all that. The Ark of the Covenant goes everywhere with them. So we don't have the Ark of the Covenant today, but if we model our lives on Jesus, then we can be bringing this peace and salvation everywhere we go.
Yeah.
And there's even like a rabbinic idea that say where people speak the words of Torah, when people study Torah, God's presence is there. And I would take it a step farther to say that like when we're living the principles of Torah, that when we're taking the ideas that we learn in Torah and in the scriptures, like love, community, justice work, hospitality, as we've been talking about, meeting people's needs, that when we're doing that, we are carrying the very presence of God through the world and through our actions. And it's in those moments that we become sanctuaries, just like the Ark of the Covenant, but we're mobile. So we're mobile sanctuaries. And we, in our lives, are the very vessels that can bring healing, safety, and salvation to people.
I love that imagery so much.
And this fits with the passage. And again, I apologize if this is where you're going.
That's okay.
This is one of my top favorite teachings, and you happen to give it, and it's just one of my favorites. And it reminds me of in the New Testament where it says, "You plural are the temple singular, and the Spirit of God dwells amidst you." And growing up in the church, we didn't parse that out very well. And so it became, don't get a tattoo because you're a temple. The temple,
Yeah.
God only had a temple. In fact, that was very intentional. A bunch of other gods had other temples, but God only had a singular temple. And in the New Testament, it talks about that the people, the faithful, are the stones, the hewn stones, right? We even have Jesus as the cornerstone, right? But we are the hewn stones, and together in community, we make up the temple, and that God's presence is in the midst of that space.
Yeah.
And of course, we're mobile, unlike those stones. So it makes me, everything you're saying just brings that imagery even more fully to life for me.
Yeah. So, if we think back to all those vessels we listed, the Ark of the Covenant, Moses' basket, Noah's Ark, the whale, the wells, I'm probably forgetting some that we mentioned, but the manger, they were all different, right? They were made of different things. I think, there's no point in, we can just imagine that. There's no point in listing that. I have it written down somewhere, but the point being that all these different vessels were perfect for the intended job.
Yeah. Oh.
So the vessel that we've been given by God is enough to bring safety, healing, love, and sanctuary into the various places and relationships and situations that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to grow and change and learn, or that we're perfect, but it does mean that we're capable in this moment to create safe spaces. And we'll probably make mistakes and we'll miss opportunities. Sure. But reflecting on the areas that we need to grow in to create safety is part of creating safety.
Yeah.
And and I think that as we create safety and healing and sanctuary, that it's also helpful to, how do I want to say this? I mean, this is where the podcast thing kind of creates a barrier. But I would love to hear comments on this podcast or on our social media of ways that you think that you have created safety, ways that you've been mindful of creating safety or sanctuary in your life, either through your home or out and about. And it's not really meant to be oh, let's just all brag about the things that we're doing, but the experiences of other people, it waters the soil of our hearts, I think.
I love what you said about how all of the vessels were different, because I think something we tend to do, particularly I think in Christianity, is dictate a certain way someone should be in order to be a vessel for God,
Yeah.
And we homogenize that. And it's well, if you're not that, then you're not, doing what you need to do. And I just love that imagery that we all might look a little different and do it a little differently, but it doesn't mean any one way is better than the other. And it kind of reminds me of a time when I was a little jealous of a coworker, and she had just pulled off this like amazing event and all that stuff. And I just, instead of just being congratulatory and, I was like, oh man, I wish I had those talents. And I was just like talking about like, oh, poor me. I wish I was more like you or whatever. And she goes, no, you don't get to do that. And I was like, what? And she's like, you have all these other amazing things here. You can't have mine too. Like, then you have everything. And that's not, she's like, no. And I was just like, huh. Like, first of all, it was pointing out to me, like, yeah, I just like took this great moment for her and made it all about me, but also, I think sometimes we feel like, you were talking about how we can all improve over time, right? But I think sometimes we take that too far and we're like, well, I need to be this, 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 and this. And we want to be all things to all people. It's like, oh, I want to be that quiet and kind person, but I also want to be the bold person who's not afraid to, step up and yell when necessary, and we need all those different kinds of people.
Yes,
and
the community.
Not all of us can be all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something that comes very naturally or easily to somebody might be really hard or difficult for somebody else to do.
Right. And you can't take a manger and make it a boat.
Yeah.
But you can make it a bed. Just saying.
Yeah. So like,
yeah.
Each of these vessels had a different purpose.
Something else that came to mind when you were talking about like having people share. There's almost a part of me that wants people to share the innocuous things that we do, right? Like, and maybe that's not the right word, but we in our household, we don't have any small children. For a long time, we still always kept toys here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we always kept things here for any children that might end up in our space. That isn't something we would normally list when thinking about salvation, or that even though we don't have any small kids, maybe we put, and we don't. So keep that in mind if you bring your small kids to our house, but maybe we put outlet covers on, right?
Yeah.
Because we're thinking about things. And I think sometimes when we do this listing or we do this thinking, we think, oh, what I do is not, in fact, we might not even consider those items.
Because they feel small.
Right. Yeah. Instead, it's like, oh, I led this advocacy thing. Yeah. And that's amazing. And I'm grateful that we have people in our world that do those things.
Right.
But I think we often overlook those really, which we would call tiny.
Yeah.
But I would say, as much as I just said earlier, the devil's in the details, right? That the beauty of salvation is in the details, that the things that we think about and make sure that we have. And I think this goes to the friend that, the mutual friend of all of ours that we were talking about earlier. Part of what she does is some of those really details. Tiny things.
Yeah.
Like tiny things that in and of themselves, you would be like, oh, that was thoughtful. But the more you realize those details over and over again, you realize, no, this is way more than thoughtful.
Yeah.
It's interesting because especially when you think about being like a mobile sanctuary, when you first taught on this at church, Sarah, like I really was, absorbing it and thinking about it. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm out and about, like running errands and things like that. And so, Don, you were saying like very small things. Service workers go through it, man. Yeah. Like they really do. And so I try really hard to be like positive and smiling when I'm placing my orders. And then if there's something wrong, I'll handle it kindly, But then even the small things like, I always put my cart back in the cart return. And I'll often shove all the carts together so they're ready for the person who has to take them all back, And so I just try to do these little things that I'm like, this took me like 10 seconds, but it might really make an impact on somebody else's day.
I know that this teaching, when you had originally given it, shaped a handful of things in me, specifically around interacting with people. And service industry, I think, is a common one for me as well, where if something gets messed up, it used to be a joke in our household that if we went out to dinner, which we don't do often, but if we went out to dinner, inevitably my meal would get messed up.
Oh yeah. It was always Don's.
Or they wouldn't have what I ordered. Right. It was just, and it was so common and so often that it became a joke. Like I always had to think of what my second thing was I was going to order, because the first thing would not
And
be
I wouldn't want him to order something I wanted to, because then it meant I wouldn't get it.
But in recent times, since you gave this teaching, I found myself actually blessing God when it's my order that gets messed up. Because I go, if an order was going to be messed up, I'm the right person to mess up the order.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to be kind. Oftentimes I'll be like, I'm so sorry this happened. And the thing that I have learned to say that I cherish, and as a dad joke person, I often say the same terrible dad jokes. This is one that I'm glad I repeat. It's not a joke, but it's, if this is the worst thing that happens to me today, I'm going to have a good day.
Yeah.
And there's something about that to let them know this is not of any great magnitude. And it's also a good reminder to me that, look, if seriously the worst thing that happens to me today is that they mix up my coffee order, I'm going to have a good day.
And you often say that to the person. You're like, look, if this is the worst thing that happens to me today.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's my go-to on that. So, this teaching of yours has really impacted the way that I think about. I think sometimes we can imagine that the only way we can be a mobile sanctuary or we can bring salvation to areas are huge.
Yeah, right.
And that, well, what can I do to change the world? And honestly, I think those moments of kindness, those moments that a person can mess up but yet still be safe because you happen to be the person in front of them.
Yeah.
Those are life-changing. Those are world-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the topic of little things, like I think even just like making eye contact with people.
Yes.
And listening well to what they're saying.
So bad.
Although I did one time, there was someone that I when I would speak with them, I always made eye contact, and it made them extremely uncomfortable because they were from, I think, somewhere in South America, and it was inappropriate for be making eye contact, and I had no idea. And so
interesting.
Oh, so it could be a cultural thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the last point that I wanted to bring out of this is to point out that the ark was meant to be carried by a community.
Ooh.
4 people carried the ark. God was the guide. So we are meant to be supported, nurtured, and to work alongside community in being these vessels of sanctuary. It isn't one more thing to add to your personal to-do list. And Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We can't fool ourselves to think that there will be no burden when we hear that verse. But Jesus suggests that the burden is light. So for me, I think about the burden being light when in times in my life where I've done something impactful, but it felt pretty easy for me, or it came naturally, or it like lined up with my strengths, or like it was still a burden, like, but something was done, but it can also be described as light because either I was supported by community, I was encouraged, I had a super strong belief in what I was doing, or it energized me. So it was still work. It was still a burden in some degrees, but it felt light. So I think that's an important important piece to think about, that, like we do this in community and it's not meant to be a guilt trip or a heavy yoke on us alone.
And the rabbinic tradition with the ark was that the ark carried itself. That the 4 people that were there, that there was no burden to it. It was more so the honor of carrying it.
Yeah.
And that the ark carried itself, which I think fits beautifully into what you're saying, that if we're doing this communally, that the burden is light.
Yeah.
because we have each other there with us.
Yeah.
So
We all create safety for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's that I always hated these things because I'm such an introvert, but it's that thing where they tell everyone to stand in a circle facing facing one direction, and then tell everyone to sit down at the same time. You sit on everyone's lap. And so you listen, if I'm ever at something that you're doing, please don't do an icebreaker. Please do not do an icebreaker.
That's interesting because it's almost like a group trust fall.
It is.
Like
I mean,
everybody has to trust
Yeah.
that everyone's gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But I think like the burden is light, these things that we were kind of like, well, these are all tiny things. Those burdens were light, for you to like push the carts,
Right,
It still was something to do but it's light because it's like, within your wheelhouse, within your,
Well, I think there's also
ability
things
to do.
that are easy lifts for one person, but make a huge difference to someone else.
Yeah.
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 I can think of ways that Don and I do that for each other all the time, where it like takes 5 minutes to do something, and then the other person is like, "Oh, thank you, that was so helpful,"
Yeah. Oh, I asked Glenn to make all my phone calls, all phone calls, because I don't want to talk on the phone. And
I
he
hate
does
talking on the phone.
I mean, not like relationship phone calls,
Right,
but like
right, yeah.
scheduling things, ordering
You
pizza.
call my mom and ask her how she's doing. Give me an update.
Well, sometimes I do say like, can you call mom and make sure, since it's your car that needs to go in the shop, can you call mom and make sure we can borrow her car? Because I ask my mom so many things, but most of it's not relationship. But
Right.
yeah, no, but because to him, it's like it doesn't faze him, but like sometimes I get anxiety about
Right.
talking on the phone
Yeah.
with people, and he can just do it. So
We are confounded of what to do because part of the reason there was a gap in time of our recordings, we had a couple bonus episodes we put up, is because Tana and I got sick at the same
At
time.
the same time, yeah.
And that so rarely happens in our household
Yeah.
that we are like, what happens now? Like both
Yeah.
of us were like in bed for like 4 straight days and we're like, has the world stopped?
Right.
Because we're
It was
so used
strange.
to being offset by the other person that
Right.
while one of us
Yeah.
is sick, the other person's able to step in and do some of the heavier
Like,
lifting.
can I get you some ginger ale? Can I make you soup? Or, but
Yeah,
we're
instead
both on our own.
wow, yeah,
Yeah. So, well, I love that. I love that. Being in community piece.
yeah. And that's
So-
all I got.
So, well,
that was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that was chock full of awesome stuff, and it's perfect timing because we're about at the right time to close up. Any final thoughts about this?
Do you have any?
I do. I have
Okay.
lots. I want to express my gratitude because I think that this teaching it was also bringing salvation with you, right? To bring safety into spaces. And I've watched how it has impacted people, and I'm excited to hear back from our audience
Yeah.
and how maybe hearing this is helpful or changing for them. So I just want to express my gratitude. I love this teaching. I love this idea. And the other thing I'd say is that knowing Sarah, it was easy to hear this and listen to it and believe it because Sarah exemplifies this every time I'm around her. So
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. You said you had lots of thoughts. Was that?
but I'm going to stop there.
Oh, okay.
I didn't say I was giving you all my
Got
thoughts. I just
it.
said I have lots of them.
Got it. Anything you want to end on, Sarah?
Nothing. Just keeping in mind, how can we carry the love of God into the world?
Yeah. Yeah. So, with that, I'll just say, think about what Sarah just said, how you can be a mobile sanctuary for other people. May you go and be a mobile sanctuary. And thank you for joining us today. And if you want to find us in between podcasts, you can, we're on YouTube. Where our handle is at AJFF. We're on all the socials. You can email us at info@ancientjesusfuturefaith.com and more information at ajffpodcast.com. So
I'd
yeah.
also just throw in there that we do live streams. So
Oh, right.
we don't just do podcasts. So
Right.
if you are interested in more stuff, our YouTube channel is chock full of shorts of discussions. I do a 1 minute on each chapter of the book of Genesis.
Right.
There's lots of things on there, live streams with interviews of authors, scholars, thinkers in the community. So there's lots of good things. Those are on Monday nights and Thursday nights. Those live streams, 8 p.m. Eastern. Also, we would appreciate if you want to support this podcast and what we're doing with AJFF. Check out our Buy Me a Coffee page, buymeacoffee.com/AJFF. We love doing this, but there is cost for us on our end of subscriptions and everything else to be able to broadcast and do this. And we'd appreciate offsetting any of that. So if you are interested or willing, please.
Yeah, and if you check out our YouTube channel, you can see me ambush Don with random questions and him have to try to answer off the cuff.
That's
And
always
then
fun.
get absolutely crushed by the comments of people hating on me.
Always fun. YouTube is great. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, and we'll either see you on one of these live streams or on social, or see you next time. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.